Disaggregated data is a means of kind of solidifying the state of equity in somebody's class. You can have an impression about how well you're serving your African American, Latinx, Native American students, and so on. But without having disaggregated data to look at, it's always going to be ephemeral. You're never going to really understand the magnitude of the problem. Or I shouldn't even say that it's a problem. Maybe you're doing well. You just aren't going to necessarily know what that really looks like until you take the time to look at the data. And so while some people might be intimidated by looking at that data, what I hope our work does is shows them how it can be empowering, that it can be a tool that allows them to be informed on what's working and what's not working and for which groups. And it also lets you create a vision of where you want to go. If you want to close that gap, if you want to reach that particular success rate, data shows you where to go.
So I'd never seen kind of my own pass rates broken down into such kind of fine detail before. It was always kind of aggregated together. And so it was really interesting. I could kind of, there was one instance where, you know, I knew which students were there. And so, and it was almost kind of disappointing to think and to see and to remember certain students who I know didn't make it. And so that I think is something that's very powerful and kind of is going to stick with me for sure.
It's staggering when you look at some of this data that does show that a lot of students, whether Hispanic or Black or Asian or whatever, you know, a lot of the students, for whatever reason, drop out. The retention is not there. It's not as high as I would want it to be. So what is the problem? What are we doing? What can we do to keep more students in school? What can we do to retain those students? What may we be doing wrong, thinking that we're doing everything possible to give to the students to help them out?
So the most useful strategy that I think I learned from the Center for Urban Education was to take the percentage point gaps, which is really kind of an intimidating, abstract kind of thing, and turn that into actual students. And so what I did was I took a look at all the courses that I taught over the past 2 semesters, and I looked at the number of students it would take to eliminate the gap. And what I found out was it might take a half a student per class to be able to eliminate the gap altogether. So rather than seeing a 16-point gap for my African American students, I turned that into the number of students, and what that did is it automatically had me start thinking about and visualizing in my mind who those students were. And I could start to think about, I could go through my grade book, I could go through attendance records, I could go through those particular classes and think about questions that I might ask for those particular students. And what might have I done in class to try to make a better experience for them?
Once we get into disaggregating the data, another important part is to ask, well, what are these gaps? What are the patterns I see in the data? And what might be underlying these gaps? But before you jump to conclusions, often pairing numerical data with qualitative data, or even data based on looking at your own syllabus, your own websites, or even making observations and going into learning centers, tutoring centers, financial aid offices, can be very informative to get a rich picture of the ways that institutions sometimes create barriers or sometimes are creating opportunities for students to really feel at home on campus and to feel welcome.
anytime that I came and compared it kind of to the department overall, it was like a kind of a knee-jerk wanting to be like, well, maybe it was this, maybe it was that, maybe like just kind of a little bit of kind of deer in the headlights a little bit. I felt a little defensive for sure. At the same time, like kind of after that initial rush of adrenaline, I guess, it was much more, I really appreciated the collegial aspect of my coworkers and us like, kind of talking about, well, wow, wouldn't it be interesting to find someone who is really high in this area that, that I was not very high in. And man, it would be so interesting to sit in their classroom and see what they, the impact, and not just see what they're doing, but then, kind of intentionally look at certain students in the room and how are they reacting? What sort of behaviors are they exhibiting when that teacher kind of does that behavior? And oh man, kind of looking for those kind of connections and that like anticipatory, kind of aha of, oh wow, I'm looking for that, and to be able to find it would be really interesting.